and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are taking a look at some more classic sports cars. Let's begin with one of the earliest cars in the game, the 1958 Alfa Romeo Giulietta Sprint Veloce, 90 horsepower, 97 foot-pound torque, 1,874 pounds of weight. This is tied for the least torquey car here today, however it is the lightest, probably on account of it being the oldest. A really pretty car, this Alfa Romeo Giulietta. I didn't really know about this car before they added it to Forza 7 a fair old while back now, but yeah, when I saw it I knew I had to do something with it, so it's sat in my garage and collected dust for as long as it's been in the game. But yeah, an incredibly pretty car. I do really like it. I'm a sucker for a classic Alfa Romeo, and I'm a sucker for a classic Alfa Romeo that comes in some pretty silly colours. So it comes in this sort of nice offish green colour, lime green. Really nice colour, I quite like it, and I quite like the car in general. Of course, the Giulietta name now used for a sort of mid-size family hatchback, but I guess it was sort of a family saloon car back then, but this is a sportier version of it. And 90 horsepower in 1958 is certainly nothing to shake a stick at. As far as it goes to drive, well, it drives about as pleasant as it looks, really. Just a nice, sweet old car to drive. You know, you'd expect a car of this age to have a couple of issues with the differential or body roll or something like that. Honestly, it's pretty composed considering the age of it and so on and so on. Yeah, a surprisingly nice car to drive, really sweet car, pretty good on the money car. Could be something special if you decided to tune it up, add some suspension, some more modern brakes, more modern tyres and so on and so forth. But yeah, out of the box, a perfectly sweet and pleasant little car, one that I did quite enjoy. One that I didn't enjoy, however, was this, the 1966 Nissan Silvia, 88 horsepower, 97 foot-pound torque, 2,161 pounds of weight. Again, along with the Alfa Romeo, this is tied for the lowest amount of torque. This is the first generation of Nissan Silvia, a name which carried on for 38 years, I believe it was, until it got cancelled in 2002 with the S15 generation. The later Silvias are, of course, the much more well-known ones. These earlier cars have sort of been dropped towards the wayside, which is a bit of a shame, really. There was some quite nice cars from this from the sort of previous Silvias, not your S13s, S14s, S15s, cars like the 240 RS, which was a Group B rally car. Which is a really cool thing. Don't think I've ever seen that outside of Gran Turismo, which is a bit of a shame because I think that car in Forza gets some more eyes on it, and it would definitely receive quite a bit of nice community feedback because it's an old Nissan, but mostly because I think it's cool. Don't know if the community would think it's cool. They'd probably want another version of, I don't know, an S14 or whatever. I don't really care. Anyways, as far as the Silvia goes to drive, well, it's wallowy and not very good. Yeah, this car is sort of the definition of what you expect an older car to drive like. The suspension is incredibly soft. The overall speed is not particularly there. The differential is a little bit bad. It's just not very nice, which is a bit of a shame. You know, looking at it, you'd think it'd actually be a relatively pleasant little car to chuck around. You know, something like a Lotus Elan or something, maybe in the way it drives, but yeah, no, it's just not a nice car to drive, I'm afraid. So if you look on the market for a Nissan Silvia, I'd give this one a miss. Next up, we have one of my personal favourites here, the 1967 Volvo Amazon 123 GT, 115 horsepower, 112 foot-pound torque, 2,515 pounds of weight. The second heaviest car here today, only just missing out on the most heavy car, but yeah. No, this Volvo quite heavy, but it's a Volvo, it's supposed to be safe, and yeah, a fair amount of power, 115 horsepower. It is actually the second most powerful car here today, although really not by much. So yeah, the Volvo Amazon, don't know a whole lot about the Amazon range of Volvos, of course. You know, I love a Volvo, love Volvo in general. 850R, S60R, V70R, the S60 Polestar, all the way up to the modern day XC90, T8 and all the rest of it. Love Volvos, you know, but their earlier history is a little bit checkered for me. I'm not too sure on it, and I'm not quite sure where the Amazon drops in on that. I do know the Amazon was a pretty legendary car back in its heyday, probably Sweden's best-selling car or something like that, and this sporty version, I believe, managed to light up some rally circuits. Anyways, enough about me trying to stumble through a Volvo history lesson. It is a solid car to drive, this one. You can notice the weight though. It definitely feels like a heavier car, especially jumping across from the Nissan Silvia and the Alfa Romeo into this. I instantly noticed the weight, but it is a pretty solid handle. I believe I've actually built one of these before. I think it was on Forza 6 for a video, and it was actually quite good, so yeah, don't shake a stick at these Volvo Amazons. If you build them up, they can be pretty darn nice cars, as they are out the box. As long as you expect a bit of a heavier car, it's still a pretty nice overall sports car to drive. Next up, the 1968 Opel GT, 90 horsepower, 108 foot-pound torque, 2,121 pounds of weight. I hope I mentioned with the Silvia that was the least powerful car. This is the second least powerful car, along with the Alfa actually. Same amount of power as the Alfa, a little bit more torque than the Alfa, and a little bit heavier than the Alfa, but of course it is more modern, this Opel GT. Essentially, the Opel GT is a bit of a weird car. This was one that was brought over to America from Opel, but it was designed with Americans in mind, which Opel, yeah, sure, it kind of looks like a Corvette C3, but a little bit weirder. It's got the coolest pop-up headlights in the world, I know that much about it. Opel GT, they're starting to gain in popularity now. They're a little bit of a cult classic now, but back when they were released, I believe they got praised for the handling, but everything else sort of fell apart a little bit, and Opel never really managed to survive in the North American market. As far as it goes to drive, it's a great little car to drive, this one. Really is quite a hoot to drive. The Opel GT's always actually been quite a respectable car to drive. You know, I've heard this said about these cars in real life, and to be honest with you, in game it's not too far from the truth. They kind of are like mini C3 Corvettes, but with this you get all of the handling and the niceties that you get for a C3 Corvette with all the power, which in a C3 goes to, you know, make the experience a lot harder to drive. But this has 90 horsepower, you can chuck it anyway, you know, you can't, it's not powerful enough to get itself into trouble. A really fun little car, very chuckable, very much recommended if you want to build something. All the cars in Forza usually do make quite good race cars, and that should be no exception. Next up, another Nissan, the 1970 Datsun 510, 96 horsepower, 100 foot-pound torque, 2,127 pounds of weight. This is, I believe the 510 is actually quite a legendary car in the racing scene. As much as it just does look like a generic three-box saloon car, there was something about the way this car handled. I believe the engines were quite susceptible to tuning as well. This was one of Nissan's very first, one of Japan's very first sort of breakout successes. One of the first cars that really helped put them on the map, along with cars like the Datsun 240Z and others that I can't think of the names of right now, but you get my point. The 510 became a pretty legendary car in the racing community. Today it's widely sort of respected among racing fans and people that knows what these cars are capable of, and even Nissan themselves did the IDX Nismo concept, which was kind of a modernized version of that car. We have tested that car before, unfortunately never made it to market, but that was a thing we did in the Concept Car Clash episode of Top Gear Rivals. This one, not as quick as that had a 1.6 turbocharged engine and modernness and all the rest of it. This doesn't have that. In fact, unfortunately the 510 doesn't quite make up for its pedigree in game. It's a very awkward car to drive, this one, not a lot of fun. It was about everywhere. The differential is awful in this car. It's not massively quick, it's not massively, you know, it hasn't got anything massively good going on for it. It's just sort of a weird off car to drive. Not much fan of this one, gotta be perfectly honest. You know, you can see the really skinny tires as well, which probably don't help. Next up, 1973 Ford Escort RS 1600, 113 horsepower, 110 foot-pound torque, 1,918 pounds of weight. As far as cars go on this list, I mean, this was by far and away the one I was most excited to drive. The Ford Escort, an absolute British icon is the Ford Escort. It was our best-selling car for literally years and years and years, and then it's been a Ford after that, and a Ford after that, and a Ford after that. We like our Fords here in the UK, and I guess the Escort was sort of one of the very first that started our love affliction with Ford. This, the Cortina, the Transit van, they really helped to model Euro Ford into what it is today, which is just legendary. The Mark 1 Escort, you know, huge amounts of rally success, touring car success, all the rest of it. It's been on the big screen, it's been in Fast and Furious. The Escort's been everywhere. It is an incredible car and it's quite attractive, and yeah, these things command serious money these days. It's insane how much you have to pay for a nice Mark 1 Escort at this point. Fortunately in Forza we can drive it, like we nicked it, which helps. As far as it goes to drive, unfortunately this has a bad differential, which I wasn't expecting. I was kind of hoping to be a little bit better. There is a bit of lean to this one, but on the plus side, unlike the Datsun, which drove awkward and weird, this has some speed to it. This really is quite a quick car, actually. Still quite sprightly. 113 horsepower, 1,918 pounds. I would hazard this probably has one of the best power to weight ratios here today, and you can really feel it in the way this car drives. It is a really very, very nice car to drive. If you sort that differential out and the suspension, yeah, you'd have a really good winner there. Next up, our big boy for today, the 1973 Nissan Skyline HT 2000 GTR, 158 horsepower, 130 foot-pound torque, 2,524 pounds of weight. It is the most powerful car here today, the torquiest car here today, and the heaviest car here today. This really was quite ahead of its time looking at those figures, you know, 158 horsepower, 2,524 pounds of weight. That embarrasses most American smog-restricted muscle cars, and I mean even, you know, muscle cars in their prime might have been scared of this thing a little bit. The Skyline GTR, of course, is very successful. This was the second generation of the GTR Skyline. I do not have a chassis code for you. I do know it looks very American, the most American car ever made. We've made that joke before. Kind of looks like what happens when you smash a Dodge Charger together with... Ooh, I'm trying to think of a muscle car that had these circular rear lights. Let me know down below in the comment section. I guess a Charger did. Kind of looks like a 68 Charger. There you go. I'm sure it probably looks like a bunch of other muscle cars that you can shout at me about. As far as this one goes to drive, it's pretty darn good. You know, it was ahead of its time, and it kind of drives like a car that's ahead of its time. A little bit soft through the corners, you know, it's not perfect. It's not a modern car. But especially after climbing out the Escort, which unfortunately does suffer with the bad differential. This was nice. This was a nice change of pace, and this genuinely felt quite quick. When 160 horsepower in an old car feels quick, you know I drove some slow cars today, but yeah, I really liked driving this one pretty good. I'd still have the older one though over this one, the 71 model. And finally today, the 1979 Opel Kadett C GT-E, 114 horsepower, 119 foot-pound torque, 2,028 pounds of weight. I guess you could see this as the German rival to the Ford Escort, and I mean, of course, the Escort and the Astra, which is what the Kadett would become. You know, those fought for years and years and years in sales, and I mean, the Opel/Vauxhall always lost in the UK. Not quite sure how, you know, the Escort dealt in other countries. But yeah, of course, you know, Kadetts, Astras, all big German heroes. This GTE version, I don't know a lot about it. I really should do some research on this car at some point, because I think it looks really cool with the two-tone white and yellow. I like these things. I believe these had a similar sort of story to the Escort, you know, did well in touring car racing, rallying, etc, etc. Until the Manta came along anyways, which wasn't too long after this, actually, in 1979. By far and away the newest car here today as well, worth mentioning. As far as the Kadett goes to drive, it is a pretty good car to drive, however, a little bit forgettable. You know, the Escort, for all of its downfalls, was memorable. You know, a lot of the cars here today were actually quite memorable to drive, but the Kadett, you know, it's good and all, it's just, there's no real pizzazz to it. It is just kind of forgettable, and I'm not trying to knock the car for that, you know, it's perfectly fine. If you love the Kadett, I can understand why, because it is a great driving car, and with mods I'm sure it'd be great. But it's just kind of forgettable. It's just sort of a bit of a nothing car to drive. It's a bit oatmeal, which, yeah, a little bit of a shame to the Kadett. No character like the Escort had. Anyways, on to the times then, and unsurprisingly, the quickest car today was the Nissan Skyline 2000 GTR with 135.041, goes into 398th place. Interestingly though, it is about half a second down on the 1971 equivalent, so yeah, the older car was actually quicker. Speaking of the older car being actually quicker, in 412th place we find the Ford Escort RS 1600, with 136.780, just beating out the RS 1800, which came a few years afterwards. In 418th place we find the Opel Kadett C GTE with 137.901. It goes in between a Ram Runner and an old Bugatti Le Mans car. It also beats out a Land Rover Defender. This is a very weird leaderboard still, but yeah, decent effort from the cadet. Moving down the board some more, we find our main congregation of cars. In 436th place, we find the Opel GT with a 141.699. In 437th place, the oldest car today, the Alfa Romeo Giulietta Sprint Veloce, with a 141.883, beats out a Corvette of relatively similar vintage, actually. Fiat 8V Supersonic, which again, similar-ish vintage, did really rather well there. The Volvo Amazon 123 GT is in 442nd place with a 142.977, slightly quicker than any Toyota Hilux and a Jeep Grand Wagoneer, losing out to a very ancient BMW 328, but the Volvo was still a good laugh to drive. And finally today, in 447th place, we find the Datsun 510 with a 143.332. The diff really affected that car, but it is quicker than a 356A Speedster, which is interesting. And in 450th place, the Nissan Silvia with a 143.709. That car just could not really cope with our track or anything in general, really. A bit of a poor choice, a little bit upsetting about the Silvia not being quite as good as I had hoped, because yeah, that car... not too great. So the Nissan offerings, I mean, didn't do really as well as we may have expected it to. The Ford was decent despite a bad differential. Out of all the cars here today, my favourite's probably that Alfa Romeo. I think I left my heart in that car because I loved it quite a lot. Anyways, that is it for this edition of Forza Top Gear Laps. Do hope you've enjoyed. As always, stay tuned for the Rivals episode, which should be launching shortly after this episode, and stay tuned for the next main episode, where we take a look at some more retro sports cars. So join us for that. Until then, farewell.
You know the sorrow that my heart holds in, knowing just where my hopes and dreams are going. I'll only you got up in a wall that you are not part of. Eyes on the slit of your father with love.